If you're here for everyday buns, come on down and grab a seat up at the front. Wicked. Hi. I'm going to read some bios, and then we're going to have a chat, and then you're going to have a chance to ask some questions. And then we're going to have a signing, and you can come and ask any questions that you were too shy to ask in front of an audience. My name is Mairi. I run Lighthouse, Edinburgh's Radical Bookshop. Welcome to the Radical Book Fair on a Sunday morning, in person and online. I have such a brilliant panel for you this morning, whose work has inspired and informed and sort of galvanized a lot of the thinking even around the fair this year. So thank you all. I'm going to read out their bios, and then you're going to applaud. That's how that's going to work, because they're great. So first up, to my left, we have Jake Hull, a freelance journalist, public speaker, and author of The Art of Drag and the very brilliant Shoulder to Shoulder, A Queer History of Solidarity, Coalition, and Chaos. They write extensively on queer culture, drag history, sex work, and harm reduction, all through the lens of leftist politics, and have worked in-house for publications including the Independent and MEL Magazine and LA-based online culture magazine, which delves deep into masculinity, sex, and porn through witty, light-hearted lens. When not chained to a laptop, Jake can be found partying topless in drag clubs and curating events as part of a training scheme with Sheffield venue DINA.
I had to blot this bio out of my mind.
I like the little casual chained reference in there. Well done. Joel White is a writer and researcher based in Glasgow and the co-author of the phenomenal Friends in Common, Radical Friendship and Everyday Solidarities. He is involved with groups in the city that organise around mutual aid, migrant solidarity, prison abolition and anti-racism. His writing has appeared in The Guardian, Wire, Tribune and the LRB blog, and he co-runs the record label GLARC, or is it Glark? Glark. Okay, yeah. Nik, finally, over on the end, is a member of Plan C, an Edinburgh-based university worker teaching and researching global history and Marxism. His activism has focused on social reproduction support for the International Women's Strike, political education, workplace organising, and the international solidarity with the Kurdish freedom movement. Will you join me in welcoming today's speaker? Thank you for being here today. I want to get us started by thinking about friendship and political belonging and the ways that we find each other, and thinking about that sort of really nebulous word that people throw around, community. Like, how do we find our people? And so I want to start you off by asking each of you to tell me a little bit about the way that you conceive of or think about and have come to your understanding of friendship, or friendship and community, or political belonging. And I'm going to start with you, Nik, because you're in my eye line.
That was so unexpected. I was so sure it was going to go this way, and I would have lots of time to listen to Jake and Joel's amazing thoughts and formulate what I was going to say. Well, thank you, and thank you everyone for coming. As you may have noticed from the bios, I'm in a slightly different position to my amazing co-panelists, in that I'm a member of an organisation that's recently started a new journal that's been trying to refind itself after what I'm sure, like for many of you, it's been a difficult few years trying to figure out how you organise the global pandemic and with the concatenating crises. Plan C as an organisation has existed since roughly 2010. It came out of the student movement, combining with some older activist networks, particularly the sort of anarchist movement in the UK, which got so decimated by the spy cop scandal, where the state committed statutory rape on activists, and then Climate Camp and various other groups, and became a membership organisation in 2014. And I joined in 2017. And I joined as someone who was looking for an organisation, looking to get active, and I found one that looked right. because of its stated principles, its aims, like not least this focus on social reproduction, I'm sure a term we'll come back to. And so I think I fit like one side of people who are joining the organization that way. And of course, for a lot of people, and especially the people who founded the organization, it did come out of friendship groups. And I think, especially since the 90s and since, for many, if not most activists, the sort of discrediting of those older forms of organization that had dominated the 20th century. Friendship groups or affinity groups, it's another way of saying the same thing, people who are close to each other, became the main way that we organize. And that was something that I definitely hadn't expected when I joined the organization. You quickly find out that there's some groups of people who know each other on a deeper level, who have grown up together in many instances. They've gone to university together. They've really co-developed each other. They are part of each other in a way that you're just not when you start and joining an organization as a comrade rather than a friend, which is a distinction I'll come back to. But I think the way in which you can start to break down those is in the context of explicit organization. So that's one lesson that we came to. And the reason why we wanted to become a membership organization, to show that we want to build caring relationships with each other. We want to develop that kind of depth that people who had been friendship groups had been, but we're also recognizing that we're committing to a struggle together. And committing to a struggle together also means struggling with each other, because we're all products of this world that we're part of. We all have anxieties that manifest themselves in different ways because of how we've been developed within this world. And so, in a sense, there are certain commitments to comradeship that require doing things that we wouldn't do with our friends. And I think here, and I'll pass on just after saying this, I think here maybe one of the most important is accountability and being able to criticize. There are lots of times where we might not do that with friends in small ways because we want to preserve that relationship. We don't want to go into that dangerous place where we say something that may either fundamentally change or break our connection to someone. I think in the context of revolutionary struggle, moments like that are where we have to find ways to move forward and do it together. And I think the Kurdish freedom movement, which I spend a lot of time organizing with through Plan C and as an individual, has a really interesting answer here. Their word for comradeship, hevalti, is the same as the word for friendship. But it's understood as a friendship in a way where any accountability, any criticism that you give someone is at the same time a commitment to work with them. That it's not holding them to a standard, but saying this is an issue that we need to work on together. So any criticism is an opening. Any moment of accountability is an opening. And I think it's that kind of political friendship that's really hard, because our reactions to criticism are armor, and we often need it. But it can, done in the right way, become an engine of revolutionary struggle where we're changing each other at the same time as changing the world around us.
I love that. Thank you. You're up next, John.
I am up. Okay. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. Thanks, Nick. That was lots to think about already. I guess my friends criticise me all the time, and I'm criticising them a lot too, so apologies. But I fully take your point. It's an important point, and I think we'll come back to this friendship, comradeship kind of friction, blur, distinction. I hope we do anyway. And Havelti, again, is something we write about in this book that I wrote with my friend Laura, who lives here but couldn't be here right now, which is a shame. She's brilliant. And she's a historian, and in many ways it's kind of secretly a history book. I don't think when we pitched the book that's what we told them it would be, but it is kind of a history book, and it looks at this history that Nik's kind of talking about, really, specifically the kind of history that me as a sort of elder millennial grew up in, where there was this kind of, just assumed sense that friendship was how we did politics, to be honest, and that we don't do comradeship anymore. People were, for all kinds of reasons, we just inherited this legacy of the traditional, both kind of mass democratic party structure and the communist vanguard party structure as toxic and not for us. And I think sometimes that was under-examined, but I think other times we kind of just implicitly got that that was probably not the vehicle we needed right now in, say, the 2010 student movement or prior to that. And there's lots of ways in the book we try to think about how friendship is conditioned kind of materially and by discourse in the world we live in right now. Like, what kinds of friendship are we told to inhabit? Who gets to do and inhabit those kinds of friendship? Whose friendships are policed and kind of eroded by the capitalist structures we live in? But I guess that's kind of spark for us, for me personally, really, to start thinking about friendship in this way, where it started to suddenly feel like something that I'd just been kind of implicitly seeing or doing politically for a long time, was when I was volunteering at a place called the Unity Centre, which was a drop-in space for anyone in the asylum and immigration system in Glasgow. It was going for about 20 years, sadly, ended around the time of the pandemic. We were just talking before about how many social movement organisations in Glasgow really didn't sort of manage to get through the pandemic, sadly. But Unity did a lot of great work during the pandemic and then closed. It was entirely voluntary. It opened 9 to 5 most of the time for 20 years without paid staff. And it was a drop-in space that anyone could come who was going through the immigration system. As people might know, Glasgow was, until last year, the only dispersal city in Scotland. So we had, this kind of, I lived there, I've lived there for 10 years. At any point, 2,000 to 3,000 people in the asylum system living in Glasgow. So it became a hub for kind of no borders politics, anti-racist politics. And I was kind of heavily involved for a long time, and I was in the collective, and I'd always said, oh God, the last thing anyone needs is like someone writing about this for a kind of academic or whatever political book. But at a certain point, actually during the pandemic as well, I was like thinking back to my first training session as a volunteer at Unity, and the person who trained me had said, here we try and use the word friend. We don't use the word comrade. We don't use kind of refugee, asylum seeker. So it was also about kind of trying to get past those distinctions of citizenship and status and nationality. The phrase was, we try and say friend. And that always stayed with me, that kind of effort of what it means to try and befriend someone across like massive differences, material differences. It wasn't about denying those. Hopefully we'll get into that too. There's a lot of ways that friendship can and has operated in a very sort of unilateral, universalized way. Just like, well, we're going to befriend this suffering person, which is obviously the opposite of, I think, the kind of politics we want to inhabit. But when we talk about friendship as a solidarity, political friendship, havalti, these concepts, I really do think that there's something really powerful there, and that's kind of was the prompt for writing the book. And we look at this history of kind of particularly after the 1970s, but into the kind of 90s, noughties, kind of anti-globalization, ultra-globalization movement that I guess I grew up in. That kind of default to affinity with a sort of sense of embarrassment too, right? Oh, kind of like, oh God, are we just doing this with our mates? Like, how do we move beyond that? And people didn't really want to talk about it because they didn't want to admit that was actually how most people seem to have come to the movement, was through friends inviting them in. And you would still find people who came, very specifically because they had read a book or found an idea that really spoke to them. But a lot of people, the thing that sort of sustained them and kept them there seemed to be interpersonal bonds. And yet there was a sense of sort of embarrassment, like, oh, well, we shouldn't, is that political? So we were trying to think about that, how that is political and what we can do with that. And we go a bit further back as well, thanks to Laura, who is a historian of the 19th century. And she says, in many ways, her work is looking at how kind of prior to the moment of the kind of the comrade or the collective worker, in the language of endnotes, who we talk about, the communist writing group in the book. This kind of moment of the organised working class collective worker sort of aligning with the political belonging structure of comradeship and the party. There was a great history before that, which also gets lost, of friendship, fraternity, different terms, different ways of organising and belonging that really kind of set the ground for the comradeship. So one of the arguments we kind of make in the book, if people are sitting here going, well, we just do need the comrades still, is that if you really do believe that we need to have comradeship and the party form in some way that's kind of from that era, I'd be interested to hear, really excited to have a wider chat about this, and I will stop in a sec for that reason. But I think we need to also talk about building these bonds, and that's what they did prior to the Comrade. That's what a lot of the early forms of socialist anarchist organising around the world have done in different ways. So I'd be interested to talk about that, but I guess that's a bit of context, hopefully, for your question. Yeah.
So I guess I come from a queer context, and I grew up in Conisborough, which is, there's a castle. I went there many times on school trips. But there kind of weren't really many other visibly queer people. So I think I went to university in Birmingham, and it was just like this excitement that I could finally be in these like gay bars and these like really communal spaces. So I don't think I'm alone in this. I think a lot of queer people, they find friendship through activism, and also just sometimes activism, I think there's always been quite a holistic view of activism. I think sometimes that you can have this close network of friends and you can all look out for each other, and that sustains this in its own way. So I think also just a lot of my friends are marginalized in some way. And to me, it's like the biggest act of care. It's like the biggest act of friendship to be like, well, why would I not want to fight for you? Like, why would I not be anti-racist? Why would I not fight for disability justice? Like, to me, that is, I don't know, it's an act of love. And I think that's what I don't understand sometimes. When you see like those articles, because I'm a journalist and you get like 50 quid to do like an op-ed that no one ever reads. But there's like this whole thing where it's like, could you be friends with a Tory? And it's like, but I think, first of all, it really flattens any kind of nuance, right? Because I don't think that people don't think in those ways necessarily. But I also just think that like your politics are your worldview. Like your politics are who you think deserves rights and who doesn't. Your politics are, who you are willing to view as human. And all of those things are so imbued in friendship. And this is also a thing because I've worked with like a lot of queer and trans young people. And you often have people who've just never met a trans person. And I think there's a real value to friendship because it does humanize in a way that I don't think the media ever really can. Because, yeah, I don't think nuance necessarily makes headlines, and it doesn't necessarily sell, magazines or whatever it may be. So I think that friendship in that way is really, really valuable. And I think it is that kind of renewed commitment, because when I think about, this, what is presented as like an abstract struggle, I can think of the people that are impacted by that, because you see, and if you've worked in NGOs, if you've done organizing, if you've been in networks, you see the people who are actually impacted by that. And I think it is, in a way, like friendship animates everything. And also, so much of the time, it always just feels like politics have to be reactionary because there's like always another thing. There's always another fire to put out. And I think so much of what I found when writing Shoulder to Shoulder is that history is really cyclical. And I mean, there's an example in the books that I was in New York when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And that was like this bedrock of legislation that enshrined abortion rights. But then it got rolled back. And that's the thing. I think that even if we do win rights, you kind of always have it in the back of your mind they're built on beds of sand anyway, which is, in a way, so, it's so depressing. But in some ways, it's also just like, okay, well, queer people have existed. Marginalized people have existed. And I think that's what I really found looking through history, is that you see these people who, like, could have been your friends. Like, you look at these historical examples and you look at something like ACT UP. People were dying en masse. Like, the governments were turning their eyes away. Nobody wanted to talk about it. People were literally dying alone in hospital wards because people feared contagion, but they didn't actually. And you look at how when you strip away friendship and when you isolate somebody, how much it can destroy a person. So I think, I don't know if it's not really answering your question, to be honest, so I apologize. But I just do think that throughout history, the stories that I kept coming back to were the friendships. And you look at people that make friendships and build friendships through activism, and that has also kind of been the way that I've done it. I've come to queer organizations, met friends through that, and those friends are, I hope, lifelong.
I love that. There's a few threads I want to pull on in there. One of them is this idea of like friendships through time. And that's obviously a recurring part of your book, Joel, but that thing of like these figures in the past that would have been our mates. And I think we've all felt that in building struggle, where you look back and you were like, yeah, I would have wanted to organize with you, this person I never met in the past. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And then I want to go in a different direction around friendship and organizing with people we don't like, or that friendship might be this resilient bond that keeps a group together, but you have to build it somehow. And I think it occurs in, it's sort of explored in guillotines, and there's that idea of like you might not arrive fully formed at a care and loving place. And you see it in some of the movements in Shoulder to Shoulder as well, where it's just like people organize together across huge differences. And then it was friendship over time that was built by the collaboration. So if we start with the history, if I send it to you first, Joel.
Yeah, sure.
Can you talk about some of the friends that the two of you made or surfaced for the book?
Yeah. I mean, so the joke I always make is it's great because the archive can't tell you they don't want to be your friend, and you can just like go and hang out in an archive and find all kinds of friends, and then that's the only type of unilateral friendship I would recommend. But no, it's not true either, right? Anyone who's spent time in archive, you do start to hear the voices talk back, and they tell you things, and you learn a lot. And I think like there's a really important like. People like Saidiya Hartman and others have done really incredible, like critical fabulation, this phrase that they use to do this really incredible archival work where friendship is such a key part of her writing, I think, and like she's building these friendships and finding these erasures. And I mean, we say gaps, but we mean violent erasures, right? In the archive, where groups of working class black women, queer people, particularly at the intersection of all that, are like erased and completely just like dispelled from these colonial archives, and she finds ways to creatively try and rewrite them into it. I think we can take so much from that. I think lots of queer history does that to a degree, and I think Laura writes very beautifully about the experiences of that in terms of finding kind of commonality in the archive, the lesbian archive, and like when I was recently working on this project in Bradford, where I'm from, we did a kind of community archiving kind of initiative there, where there's a place called the Bradford Resource Centre that was active from 1979 for quite a long time. And it was this amazing place. It was like 5 floors. So I just do a slight sort of sidebar because I think it's genuinely interesting. And I'm also interested because there was a sibling trade union resource centre in Edinburgh that I haven't found anything out about yet. So if anyone has any memories or anything about that, I'd love to know. But basically, Bradford was part of this network of trade union resource centres. It had 5 floors. It had a kind of community art space with like a photo development lab. It had art studios. It had LGBT offices for different groups. It had anti-racist groups, trade union groups. It had a recording studio in the basement. Incredible place. And then over the years, everything got cut, the funding got lost. It's quite a depressing story because by the time we came back to help when there was a flood there to get the archive back in, there was just a food bank operating there. And yet this whole archive of stuff that had just kind of been abandoned, and we tried to kind of archive it, and there's a website called Friends of Bradford Resource Centre if you want to look it up, and it has some of the archiving we did. The reason I'm saying this is because this was a really weird experience for me in terms of friendships in the past, because the people who basically were running that group with me in the end, I guess, and doing that archival process were like my mum's old family friends, many of whom don't get on, right? Sorry, I hope they're not here. They just don't. They'll happily admit that they had like lifetimes of organising in like women's liberation, peace movement, like various other struggles, anti-racist struggles, and they just didn't always get on. And so there was this one person who, I won't name them, but they'd come to the archive days every time and just be like, oh my God, I hate it here. I worked here for 20 years. Why am I back here? And I'd be like, you don't have to come. We could, we can do this. It's great to have you here. And they were just like, well, no, it's so important. It's my purpose. And I was like, we can learn so much from that, I think. And we don't need to get on with our friends. There's a very flattened kind of like prescriptive Friends, the TV show style idea of Friends that we're told we need to kind of try and aim towards, and we write very critically of, but kind of understanding also the impulse to that. Like a lot of us really struggle with connection, with intimacy, with finding people. So we're drawn to these very flattened, essentially just capitalist notions of friendship that do just kind of, to talk about resource reproduction, serve the system we're in, right? They help serve the nuclear family, they sustain that, and they sustain our productive capacities, right? These very flattened friendships. And I think we need to really not get into the habit of assuming that's what friendship needs to be, right? It can be something really thorny and difficult, and that's why it's beautiful. Anyway, and that was that archival space had that all the time. And obviously within there too, I remember that exact person actually was, they worked there for 20 years, right? And they came to every archive session. And at one point they were just kind of quite innocently, to be honest, saying, yeah, there's nothing really here about, that we didn't really have a queer and gay section in the library, to be honest. And then my friend was like, you're standing on a copy of Bradford in the Pink. And then literally, as we kind of uncover this whole bit of this basement, there was this whole back catalogue. And I was reading these things. I found a copy of the Bradford Surrealist Lesbian Dyke Group 1979 journal. And I grew up, to be serious, we grew up under Section 28 in a situation in schools where, people were prescribed from talking about and educating us about our queer history. And there was a group specifically for surrealist lesbian dykes in Bradford in 1979 that I'd never heard about. And this person was stood on it in a basement. And that, so I do think we can very tangibly find these histories and draw on them and be inspired. And they all fell out. The first article in there was about the sort of more working class groups of parts of that organisation feeling basically quite annoyed at how many students were turning up to meetings, and they would just chant students when they came in the pub. And I was like, this is amazing. We can learn a lot from that. Not that we should chant students as students, but that that those tensions were unfolding in a way in 1979, and they worked them through, and it's amazing. And I'll stop there. But that's what we should be doing with the archive, and we should find those friends, and we shouldn't assume that they like us, and they might be disappointed in us, and that's good. We should learn from that.
Nik, do you want to come in on that?
On the archive in particular, yeah, I think, so there is, I think the equivalent of that kind of project that quite a few Plan C members in London were part of is a thing called Mayday Rooms, which is a very similar sort of project about collecting the groups of the past. And this is a real archival challenge, right? Like the old left, like the pre-68 left, there was a few organizations that tended to have their own spaces. Like once groups became so blurred with friendship groups, when you talk to older friends in the organization, the archives that they have in under their own beds of these incredible experiments are really, really important. So that's a call. If any of you have spaces under the bed like that, do find an autonomous archive and donate. I think that two organizations in particular that many people, or campaigns that many people in Plan C look back to, again from this period in the 70s, that's kind of this making friends across distance, is on the one hand the Wages for Housework campaign in the 70s, which was based on an understanding of how unwaged housework in the home was essential for all profits made in the workplace. So the demand wages for housework, as Silvia Federici, maybe the most famous person there, said, it's an impossible demand, but that's why it's important. And so that kind of thinking was definitely really crucial. And another would be a group called Big Flame that existed in the UK in the late 60s and 70s. They were sort of 68 autonomist group. That ended up folding into Labour in the early 80s, which in the Corbyn moment was a very stark example for Plan C to be looking at. And I think the really interesting thing here is how the archival work to sort of think through what are the previous ways in which people have tried to use the same kinds of understandings that we've got to build campaigns that can sustain themselves. Translated into people meeting people from these organizations and actually becoming close friends and actually building, not just seeing them through the archive, but the archive as the sort of material traces of their struggles in their everyday lives, become a way that we actually connected to them. And I think that one of the things that raised was exactly this problem that was always, that Jacob already brought before, about trying not to keep on reinventing the wheel, and the sometimes sort of depressing surprises you have when you look at a previous group and you're like, fuck, they did exactly the same as us. We're going through exactly the same issues. And I think at its best, what that does is draw your attention to certain contradictions that just keep on coming up, that you have to look at square in the face and work through. And I think the tension between friendship as sanctuary and comradeship as a weapon is a really important one. Like a lot of people, I was less active in Plan C over the last couple of years for childcare, new job, like new things, and I found myself getting really sad, like really down at different points, and not having that connection to comrades, not feeling that sense of potential that you have when you're in a room or when you're doing an action together. But it doesn't take that long being back in an organising space for some of the other things to come screaming back as well. The feeling that you just want to be present for whatever you're doing with your other friends and family not organised, who aren't organised, and all you can do is think in the back of your head like, I really hope that this person is okay. I hope that I didn't do that, or why are they treating me like this? Like that tension there is as soon as you can see that kind of tension, I think it shows you exactly the place that you have to focus your organising. And I think a second one like that, in terms of like strategically thinking about how care works, is also how we balance trying to organise for ourselves with also recognising the limits on collectively caring for each other, because we don't have the resources, we don't have the means. And so we want to demand more resources. But the more that we demand more resources, we're demanding more resources from someone. And that has this individualizing effect, and it's often given based on households. So it creates the nuclear family, it reinforces the nuclear family as the only space of care. And that's a real contradiction. Like I think if we're able to use these returns to the archive to see like where the same things are coming up, and then focus everything on that, rather than thinking, well, actually we have stronger bonds, it's not going to happen with me and my friends or me and my comrades, then the more we can try to escape that like recurring loop.
Thank you for that. So many seeds of things I'm going to come back to around like mutual aid and the ways we show up and care for each other. But can I bring you in on that one, Jake?
So really Shoulder to Shoulder was about looking through archives to find people that I could be inspired by. I think I felt really depressed and I just recently moved back to Sheffield, and I think a lot of the times that's framed as a regression. I think if you go back too closer to where you were born and raised, especially if you're from a working class background, I think it is seen as like a step down. But Sheffield has reinvigorated my life in so many ways. And I think something that I'm really fascinated by is local archives. And I think especially with kind of queer archiving, people just don't think that they're doing anything noteworthy. And you'll talk to people who have these like incredible stories, and they are all part of this much wider tapestry of world history. But obviously we know that history gets erased, it gets whitewashed, it gets, it's always viewed through a super Western lens. And I think that people think of what they are doing as history, but we are all living history, and I think that is something that I'm trying to get better at, to kind of lean into the everyday. Because sometimes what frustrated me is that to do research, you have to go to archives. Archives are not accessible places. They're always in the back arse of a dual carriageway. You can go there between 10 and 2, and even then you've got to leave for half an hour because people have to have their lunch. You have to make an appointment 3 weeks in advance, which if you have ADHD, you're not doing that. You're just not doing that. I did a project for Historic England, and I had to beg, I think it was Norfolk or something, to let me in, because I was look, I've taken a 5-hour train ride. I'm here for 7 hours. I really just need to do this work. And I think this is what inspires me about things like the Glasgow Zine Library or Sheffield Steel City Queer History, Lavender Menace Archives in Glasgow, in Edinburgh. I think there are so many incredible small community-led archives now that are working to make archives more accessible, because first you're coming up against this tension that people haven't seen themselves worthy of being archived. And that ties into so much of society blows smoke up some people's arse and not others. Some people think that they are worthy of a platform and others don't. But it also just comes down to this fact that we are all living such rich lives, and there is something worthy of talking about in all of those things. And I think it was really difficult, especially part of the book was written when it was like still pretty post-COVID. Well, not post-COVID, but you know what I mean. It was like things still weren't operating as usual, and you still often had to rely on online resources. So then you have things like the Digital Transgender Archive, which was so invaluable for my writing. And I really want to see more of that. I want to see more digitization. I want to see things being made more accessible, because oftentimes if you are disabled, you cannot get to these archives. Like, you just physically can't get there. And it was a real kind of bugbear of mine, because first of all, I'd never seen myself as a historian, which, again, there's a whole load of institutional bias around that and, imposter syndrome and all that. But even if you did want to be a historian, even if you did want to kind of really seriously and rigorously pursue this, you have to have so many resources at your disposal. And so many of us just don't have them. And I think it really frustrated me. So that's why things like the Digital Transgender Archive was so, like, looking at the Hookers Ball, looking at, like, campus newspapers like the Berkeley Barb, and looking at things like Lavender Menace, and looking at these kind of really community-led organizations were the most valuable form of research that I could get my hands on.
I wonder if I can pick up on something in what you're saying, and also about this sense of like spaces. So like archives are not the most accessible, but also they archive a lot of things that were in place. And that physical element of being able to go to a space, whether it is to go to a rave, a club night, a meal, community centres, youth centres, that allow us to make those connections and meet people that isn't clubby as such, where you don't have to already know someone in order to meet someone, in order to make a friend. And we have capitalism has squeezed out so many of those spaces, where now you have to go to a space where you're expected to spend money in order to enjoy that incidental ability to meet a person that you might later be friends with or organize with. And it feels like that need for a physical place in order to do that. We're claiming it back in some ways through pop-ups. So I think of things like Dyke Bar in Edinburgh being one of them, or, that sense of like, okay, well, maybe we don't have a space 5 days a week, but maybe we have a space for one night every 6 weeks, but it's ours, and you don't have to know someone to be able to show up. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that vector, whether it's, the ways that we build bonds that isn't just like you already know someone, you already have that connection, whether or not it's through place or online spaces, mutual aid. Like, how do we create those caring networks if you don't already know someone? Who wants to jump in? Go for it.
Oof. I want to jump in because, space was something I was really thinking as Jake was talking just there, but like also that was the most challenging aspect, I think, of trying to organize in London in particular. So when, although I've been based here for a few years now, and I was moving back here, I was mainly very active in London in Plan C, and the spaces aren't there to do the kinds of things we need to do. Like, I think the clearest example I have is like in 2018, we were organizing for the International Women's Strike, which for a few years in the late 2010s was very strong, like transnationally, not just in the UK. And did really amazing things like managing to link up the 8th of March rally with a sex worker strike in Soho in the evenings. And so I was involved in what we called the social reproduction team. So we were cooking for everyone who was coming onto the rally, including a take-home meal for all the caregivers. As well as running a like creche that would go along with the rally, so it was kind of like a rolling picket of toddlers, and it was really fun. It was the most exciting. Like, so there's some of my happiest organizing memories because kids are crazy and it's amazing to try and organize with them. Emphasis on the try. But it logistically, trying to organize cooking that much and then transporting it. Like I mentioned Mayday rooms before, there were 2 social centres that we had access to. Mayday Rooms is in Fleet Street for very weird historical reasons that I won't go into, but we always fantasised about building our journals called guillotines, but I always wanted a catapult on the roof so that we could, because Goldman Sachs' office was right opposite. So that's in Fleet Street, or we had a space called Common House in Bethnal Green, which was rented, that we ran as a kind of commons, which we can come back to maybe as a term that maybe is more helpful to think of than mutual aid as such. But like, we needed to get this to Russell Square, which, if any of you know the geography of London, like that's no one would ever organise to do things that way. But those are the spaces that we had access to. And so it relied on someone having access to a car. It relied on like some personal networks to be like, can we use this kitchen until late? We didn't have any, which if you look at movements elsewhere, like especially in Italy, say, where the social centre movement that came out of the autonomist movement, like there are several social centres in every city. And that used to exist in the UK with the squatting movement. Like in the 70s, the squatting movement housed families on whole streets that were squatted. Obviously, that had gone down quite a lot, not least because many of those squats had been turned into social housing in the 80s. So a moment that we normally think of as defeat. But even then, in the early 2000s, a comrade was saying in a call the other day about they were hosting something as part of the ultra-globalization movement, and they thought, we need a space to run an event. They went past a building and allegedly just thought, oh, well, this looks good. And the laws at the time enabled the taking of commons and the management. Like, I don't know if anyone's tried to occupy space in London. We tried to do some in 2018 after a comrade of a few of ours, Anna Campbell, was killed by the Turkish state in Rojava. And we had a space for about 2 weeks because that's the legal cycle. And then it's gone. So I think if we need more resources, if we need more commons, more collectively managed ways of supporting ourselves, then space, and particular kinds of spaces that aren't only limited to one thing. Talk about accessibility. Mayday Rooms has 3 flights of stairs. It's not accessible to people who've had a bit of a bad day, let alone more serious ability issues. So I think space and trying to find ways of claiming that for ourselves, then space. And I mean, Lighthouse is a perfect example of how rare and important one space can be in keeping a radical scene going in a city.
Thank you. But even within that, we have to use a framework of, in order to be sustainable, we have to sell some books sometimes. Yeah. Is it using, within the framework of capitalism, yeah. Shout out to Lavender Menace, who also does like a co-working space that anyone can drop in on, and they have like really random setups where you can just go and like use space and maybe meet someone in the process. Do either of you want to come in on that?
I think that there's a lot to be learned from histories of disability justice in terms of also, especially even just in today's current climate, of how much can be done digitally. And even that's not always super accessible, but I do think there is a way to try and make more events remote, obviously like this, and I think that can be really valuable. I also think libraries are super important and really underrated. And also, so fun fact, this is my first book, The Art of Drag, has been like targeted for banning across the States. They slip these like pride equals sins bookmarks in them. It's really funny. Someone sent me a picture. They were like, do you know about this? And I was like, no, but I love it. But there has been a specific thing, I think it's like Tennessee. It's somewhere Bible Belt adjacent. And people are taking out my books, and by people I mean like evangelists, and then they are refusing to return them as like an act of like removing it from the library. Which again, the library, hopefully if they have the funds, will just buy more copies anyway, so thank you. I still get money for library returns, so great, appreciate it. But it's also, you really see, like, I've seen librarians really go to bat for me and my book, and I think libraries are progressive spaces because reading is a political act. Third spaces are increasingly political while capitalism is like squeezing everything out. So I really think that libraries are an underutilized resource, and also councils and governments, they need to see that libraries are needed. They need to see that we are using them, and too often we're just not. I'm guilty of that myself. Like, I still would rather go to the coffee shop or pay £4 for a flat white for some bizarre reason than go to a library. Do I hate myself? Yes. Just like, it is one of those things, like, you have reading groups there, you have, and I think there is a lot of conversation about third space, and I think it is really important, obviously, but libraries exist, and I don't think we don't use them enough. Also, I got a message from a friend today, because we had a chat. I'm like 32, so this really shows my age. But we had a chat about lifetime ISAs a few weeks ago. And I was like, I don't know what they are. I don't know if I should be more financially responsible. And this friend has like put together a group of people who are just going to go around to his house and they're going to all Skillshare. And they are also all politically organised. A lot of them do kind of organising in Sheffield. And they're still going to have those conversations, but also, like, I feel like if you don't have rich parents, I don't know what a stock and a share is. And these things are also super important. Like, how do we fund a movement is, I think, a big question, because in Sheffield there's a place called Gut Level. So it is like, it's a club, it's a pub, but they also really lean heavily into just being a place where if there's like a protest in town, people will go there and make banners beforehand. It has just become kind of like that kind of place. And there's a campaign called, I think it's called like Own Our Venues. I don't know if either of you, correct me if I'm getting it wrong. But basically you can buy like a share and you can invest in keeping these spaces within our communities, because Gut Level is wheelchair accessible. That in itself is very rare, like it's too rare. And we really want it to keep going, but there are schemes that are coming up. It just sucks that they have to exist, you know? Like, it shouldn't be that way. But I really do feel that libraries, I also do some youth work, and there are community centres and stuff, but even they're being squeezed out. So I just really want to say, support your libraries. And oftentimes, if you talk to the staff and get to know them, they will just let you use the space for whatever it is you need. And I think, yeah, maybe we just need to get better at asking for things. I don't know.
That's great. Plug for libraries. Do you want to come in on that?
I mean, I guess just very quickly to just underline the fact that this is like, as well as excluding people in terms of disability, it's obviously, and we write about in our book a bit, you know, there's a deep racism to how public space is policed and who gets to inhabit it in certain ways and what socialising looks like. And, you know, I think I don't need to remind people in Edinburgh that, as well as these being big, abstract kind of questions of capitalism and space, there's also some quite concrete actors in certain places. And in Edinburgh, obviously, the university is one of the key villains in the story of how public space in the city is used and distributed. And I do think pop-ups can be great, but we also need to be cautious about the kind of dynamic of the pop-up. Again, I probably don't need to remind people in Edinburgh where the greatest pop-up on earth probably happens once a year, right? And what that does to space in the city, I'm talking about the Fringe. You know, what that does, the pop-up mentality does to like the spaces that are just left empty often because it's more financially sustainable to open them for a month in August than to have them used by the community who live here the rest of the year. And obviously that has a huge impact on rental situation too. I do think like probably most people are aware and linked up with like Live in Rent and groups like that who do campaign around this and have done in Glasgow campaigns around or linked with campaigns around library closures and also free bus travel and all these other things that are intrinsic to what we actually mean when we say space. I guess I'd also just add it's a tricky one too, because I think sometimes, particularly in the sort of social worlds I've been in my life, like people think, oh, we just need to open the perfect cafe, and it needs to kind of tick all these boxes that our cafe could be, and it will be this like enclave that like allows us to escape the world. And I get that impulse, but I think we should be wary of enclavism, and that's why joining a library sort of against the library closure is a good but often quite tricky kind of thing to be a part of, right? You know, there's been various ones in my local area, and it is, I mean, we should ask for more. I mean, my local library is you know, I go there to work fairly often, and, you know, it is wild. Like, I think often in the mornings they're using it as like a drop-in space for citizens' advice. There's people coming in tears to talk about their universal credit. There's like a baby singing group happening. You know, it's quite a hard place to be in if you want to get your head down too, but it's also, it just shows just how, like, completely eroded public space has been. Everything is getting pushed in there, so we should be asking for a lot more. And I guess I'm saying, like, as well as kind of campaigning for that cafe, and we should be campaigning for these other forms of public space. To go back to Unity Centre, one thing that was very difficult there that we didn't talk about, you know, we had this kind of principle, which was unconditional support. So if you are going through the asylum and immigration system, you can turn up and we're not going to impose conditions on our support for you. We're going to try and bring you in. It wasn't in the principle of mutual aid. It wasn't just the service. It was like, we're going to try and inhabit the struggle together and learn from each other. But that also obviously creates really difficult problems, because there's times where unconditional support meets someone actually not feeling able to support a particular person for particular reasons. And people were coming from all over the world with all kinds of different things that they'd been through, and also coming from, you know, really different backgrounds, and we had to work those through. And I think it's so important to try and create space that can do that, rather than space that just is for this kind of narrow version of our friends. So I just kind of think about what that looks like, and kind of pop-up do that. I'm not sure. Maybe.
Yeah. I feel like, so I'm conscious of time. I had like a million questions. We talked about, before I was just like, we'll talk about how friendship is a threat to the state, and we'll talk about spy cups, and we'll talk about how we fix organizing in spaces when we mess up, and how we have accountability. And we don't have time for that, because I want you guys to have time for questions. So in the interest of time, a reminder that a question is a single sentence with a question mark at the end. So does anyone have a question? There will be time afterwards. Yeah, I'm going to go to the front, and then I will come to you.
Thank you all so much. I will try to keep it short. So I have been thinking about what you all said about the intersections between friendship and comradeship. And I guess because I'm a baby activist, I guess I think of it maybe more as like solidarity, because I haven't actually like had a comrade working things through. But I think for me, something that like I've realized as I've unpacked things has been, I feel like I've started to, I think like as I've unpacked things and I've been in community with other people who are still sort of unpacking things, that sometimes that can create friction where sometimes when a situation arises where something that maybe I've just brushed over in the past, or something that I wouldn't have worried about, comes up in a friendship, and I might get hurt, and the other person's like, well, that's not a big deal. Just don't worry about that. So I'm curious, I guess, about how you think about those frictions when you are the person who is maybe the vulnerable person and it is kind of in that position. If hopefully that made sense. Thank you.
Yeah, go for it. Who wants to go first? Friction and care and conflict. And I'm going to come to you. It's not going to come all the way around. So if you come around and meet me here, we'll
is a super difficult question. I don't know, because the thing is, like, I think there's always this push to really formalize collectives, right? I think people want a procedure and they want a process, but at the end of the day, when I was looking through research for Shoulder to Shoulder, so many things are disintegrated because people just didn't get on. And it's also, I think, you're looking at marginalized people, and I think we've all been through some form of something. Like, you were marginalized, that is kind of part of the deal. And I think, I don't know, if maybe kind of more breakout groups would be helpful. I don't know, because I just think that I don't think some people kind of really think about delegation. Like, they have these friendships and they have this kind of shared goal, but they don't think about organizing and who does what. So maybe it could be the role that you can, because you kind of still distance yourself from people, but still be in that community. You can do the social media, you can do the cooking, you can do the washing up. Like, there are things that can still be done where you are actually minimizing your interactions with other people. And maybe you're all in a group chat, maybe you mute it. I've muted so many. And I don't apologize for it, because I think it's difficult. You're organizing with people who are often like-minded in some sense, but I'm sure we all have this, if we are marginalized in some way, this assumption that you all get lumped together and you're going to have this magical thing in common. there are some queer people that I don't get on with, and I'm sure some people would say the same about me. But it doesn't mean that I can't still fight for their liberation. But it does also mean that sometimes I do need to minimize my interactions with people, and I know who I really gel with and who I will want to make friends with. And you just can't always have that. But I think especially if there is something that you've gone through something that feels really vulnerable for you, I think make that known. But I think also there is a way of keeping your distance, and I think things work better that way. Organizations have departments, and I think there is a way for you to play a role without also having to be in this situation where there's a high risk of conflict. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I really agree with everything Joe's saying. Like, it's just hard, and I think scale is really important here. Like our groups on sort of radical left of mainstream left, they tend to be quite small. And what sustains them is the trust that people have. And so there's that the thing I mentioned before about that resistance to raise an issue because you're worried that it might break your friendship. That's even more pressured when you're worried that breaking your friendship might destroy a political group. And there's only... there are things that can be done in the context of formal organisation. We have, and you can read an interview in Guillotines with our Care and Justice group. And the idea there is that there's a few of the members whose role is to both help manage conflict within Plan C. It's entirely self-referential, so people go to them. And also to try and provide a space for complaints to be raised about Plan C members from outside. And as you can read in the interview with Ollie, there are profound limitations to what you can do with that. It's important that we try, and it's important that we also recognise what we can't do. And what you can't do is get rid of all conflict. And so part of it is a very difficult process of trying to help someone decide what kind of conflict they're having. Because in the immediate moment, it can feel really existential. And with a bit of space, it can be like, well, actually, that was more about where I was at that time. But hearing someone say that is often really, really hard, and the quickest way to reject it. And I think like the thing to kind of remind ourselves is that this would be a lot easier to manage for example, in the Kurdish freedom movement, where these kind of things still happen all the time, but it's a large enough movement that people can go to different areas of organizing. People can have a bit of space. Whereas if you're in a group that's like 20 people, there's often nowhere else to go. And so this isn't an answer, I guess, to how it works, than to just I think there's a huge literature on this now, written by activists, and I think no one's got it perfect, but the best we can do is really try and engage with what we're all doing. And like magpie-like sort of think, okay, well, that's a good way of managing it in this moment, that's a good way of managing it in that moment. Yeah.
I've never fallen out with anyone, so I'd recommend that as an approach. That's what I'd say. Yeah. No, obviously I'm kidding. It's horrible. It's hard. I agree with these. I feel it'd be nice to get more questions. Dean Spade's Loving a Fucked Up World, it seems like it's helping a lot of people think about that overlap between like personal things we're going through and political movements, and how we bring things from each of our relationships and those to the others. I'd really recommend that. And I think we need to actively think, how do I organise with and for people I don't like and get on with, because we're going to have to do that. So yeah, it'd be nice to get some, yeah.
Cool. I'm going to stand up. So I have a shout out and a question. I'll be quick. The shout out is for a new group called Out of Work Mutual Aid that has just started. So on a Wednesday morning, it's in MacDonald Road Library, so it's making use of a library space. And I just thought it was very relevant to what we were chatting about. My question is, if not all friends are comrades and not all comrades are friends, then to what extent should we expect our friends to become our comrades and join our struggle? And if the answer is yes, how do we do that? Thank you.
That's a great question. It's like a much better way into that kind of rubbish. Have you ever kissed a Tory question? I think because it's like the kind of other end, right, of the frictions there. I think it's really hard, right? I think that some of the greatest like feelings of like betrayal and being let down in my political life have been when people I took to be friends were not willing to kind of take a particular sort of role in a movement or to kind of see the stakes that I was seeing. And I think we need to be really honest that can be really difficult. I think that kind of bleed between the personal and the political that happens in those moments is like really important to take seriously because we do feel really let down. And I think like, you know, me and Laura were joking, if we write another book, it might be about betrayal because the way that we tell stories in the left is often about betrayal, like who betrayed the cause in such a way that it didn't work out. And I think we probably need to get away from that in some ways, but we also need to lean into it. And to return to the Rojava, there's that brilliant book, about bringing the Rojava revolution home, Jenny Neasden. Oh my God, I've forgotten the other person, sorry. But they have this bit where they talk about a dispute happening when this international volunteer went out to Rojava. There was a dispute where they really didn't like someone else in their organising group. And the kind of word from their kind of older and more experienced comrades was, well, lean into that. Lean into what's not happening there when you don't get on. And obviously there's a limit to that. There's times when we shouldn't be putting ourselves at risk. There's like obviously massive hierarchies and differences of power that we need to be very attuned to. But in this case, it was kind of an interpersonal thing where they felt like this other person was like posh and annoying. And they were like, okay, well, lean into that together. That might sound like the worst thing we could, it sounds like not a particularly fun afternoon. But like, I think in the case of that chapter in that book, it was really instructive. And through that, they worked out some stuff together about each other and about what that relationship was doing. And they built like a much stronger connection, which didn't rely on them getting on. And I think the kind of inverse can happen there. But it requires having a really difficult conversation with people, like saying, sorry, but why don't you think that this thing that's having this massive material impact on the people around us is important enough for you to get involved? And I think that that's not about shaming them. And often people have really difficult reasons for not being able to get involved, and movements aren't welcoming to them. And we need to think about it that way around too. But sometimes people just can't be bothered, and that's like maybe the end of a friendship for me sometimes. And that we should be fine with ending friendships sometimes. Like, do you know what I mean? That will happen, and people feel really deeply sad and embarrassed about it. But sometimes it needs to happen, and you can do it in a fairly amicable way, I think, sometimes. But we're just trained to look again because of the scripts of friendship we have around us. So that's impossible because I don't know, there's something wrong with you, right? If you don't want to be friends with someone anymore. I mean, geez, it's like primary school, but real. Like, it really, I've had that. You know what I mean? I'm terrible for it. So hopefully that answers the question a bit. You've probably got better answers.
So I don't think I actually have any close friends that I'm not super politically aligned with, to be honest, because it's just like an act of love. I don't know, but the thing is, I think also acknowledging that people play different roles in your life, and I think not something can be an acquaintanceship, or like something can be, like, I really have a close circle of friends that I really lean on, and I have my partner that I really lean on as well, and they are the people that I need. But I also do have other people that I'll maybe see at events, or, you know, we'll chat online, or maybe I don't always know where their politics stand. But I also know that if we have something which arises, which, to be honest, I kind of don't envision it would. Sheffield's like a super socialist city. Like, it has, like, so.
The comment about the difference between people who share your views but won't show up for the movement.
It is hard, but I think it is sometimes about empathy. And I think also so much about charisma, because some people have it, some people do not. And I also think about neurodivergence. Like, to what extent should we expect people to be likable? And I think oftentimes people just get scapegoated in really different ways. And it also doesn't mean that because they're not showing up this one time, they won't show up ever. And I think sometimes it really requires perseverance. And I think it also just requires just a really deep understanding of the fact that humans are so multi-layered and life is so relentless. Like, it really, really does feel like it is. There's also, again, to come back to disability, like sometimes movements aren't accessible. I think sometimes it is the case that sometimes we aren't making enough room for people to show up in different ways, because we still have, I don't know, I can't speak for people, but I think there is still generally this idea that activism means going to a march, that it means doing this one specific thing. But people will show up in different ways, and people often won't be consistent. And this is the thing that I've seen really frequently, is that the most marginalized people in any movement end up being the ones that do the most. And oftentimes, like, I had a friend who was going to go to the anti-UKIP march in Sheffield yesterday, and she was, like, berating herself, and I love her so deeply, and she fights so hard, and, like, really berating herself because she couldn't go to this one thing. And that's different to never showing up, but it is the case that I don't think you always understand the full scope of something. You don't understand why somebody maybe isn't, or it might feel really vulnerable to have a conversation about why they're not showing up right now. Also, I think sometimes about like trans liberation protests, some people aren't out. Like, some people can't be out. And I think there are so many factors, and I try and always just lead with empathy. But it also can be difficult because you can get really pissed off. But that's when I bitch to my close friends.
It's a really good question, and I have a probably slightly unsatisfying start, but maybe more to build on it. I think it does depend on what you mean by a friend and a comrade. If a comrade, I guess friend we can take for granted a bit, like comrade, if that means like in the form area of organizing or the particular organization that you're a member of, then I think it's as a general principle that like that's what a comrade looks like. I'm not sure that's the most helpful for ourselves as much as anything else. That said, I think like picking up where Jake was saying about like what being active looks like. I think one thing that Plan C has really struggled with is cycles of hyperactivism. That when they come together with informal hierarchies in an organization, often the people who've been around the longest or are the most charismatic and so the best known, who then are often doing loads, and then every so often you'll see a message in this is several years ago, I'm not saying this is happening all the time now, but like there'll be a message in the WhatsApp chat or on the email list or whatever your organizing space is, Discord channel saying, who can do this, where is the capacity, blah, blah, blah. But it's not been stated in any clear way, like how people can get involved. And it's often really difficult at the point where you're in the middle of that hyperactivist cycle for the person who's keeping everything going to step back and go, well, actually, there's this task and there's this task and there's this task and there's this task, because that's just extra work and they could do it more quickly anyway. I think like this was something that often have a go at the old left more than anything else, but that the old left managed to do quite well because they were so clear and almost bureaucratic tendency. They had clear roles that had different where people with different levels of capacity were able to still feel like they were very meaningfully contributing towards an organization, towards one of the old socialist parties or communist parties or to a trade union. And I think that's something that I put myself firmly on the libertarian left or the anarchist left or whatever word you have for it, but I think we could try to recuperate a little bit. And we're trying to experiment a bit in with Plan C at the moment, ironically by having a distinction between members and friends. Go figure. But to try and have some kind of stepped way of people saying, well, this is what I'm able to do, and I know what responsibilities that gives me, and I'm happy to take that on, and this is what I don't want to do. But of course, there's an implicit hierarchy then about members versus friends. And I think, to come back to your question, I think maybe the best way isn't like, should in general your friends be all your comrades, but if you can sense that someone is a friend and a comrade in a general sense, that you share a worldview, and that then I think the bread and butter of workplace organizing is one-on-one conversations, and one-on-one conversations where you maximum are speaking for a third of the time and listening 2/3 of the time. I think like that with our friends, to like figure out what are the things that are stopping you or that make you feel like you don't want to be active. In a different world, if those didn't exist, what would you want to be active in? Like those kinds of conversations, I think, are the ones that can help people move along the way.
That is such a beautiful and concrete thing to take onwards, because I think we have run out of time. unfortunately. We are lucky that all three of them have publications, books that explore these ideas and so many more that you can take home and keep these conversations going and take their nuggets of wisdom. And a reminder that we have a pay it forward system. So if you can't afford the book, somebody who could has put money behind the till for you. So you can just say, can I have this book on pay it forward? And you can take it home too. So thank you to everyone who's part of that ecosystem of making sure everyone gets the books. We're going to be around a bit afterwards. At 12:30, there's an event at 12:30, and then at 1:30 there's also a community meal, and there's been some food prep that will be served downstairs, and you can stick around and meet people and break bread together and make friends. Will you all join me now in thanking our three speakers and thanking Jake, Joel, and Nick for being with us today?